Today I'm going to talk about transiting Saturn, the planet Saturn, through houses 1 through 6 of the natal birth chart. I'm going to do a series of talks on the planet Saturn through the planet Pluto transiting our natal charts. Today I'm going to start with Saturn. Saturn is a very important planet. It takes 29 and a half years to transit around a birth chart. We are all born with Saturn at a certain position in our birth charts, depending on what day, month, year we were born, what time we were born, and the location we were born. So we all have our unique Saturn in a particular house, one of 12 houses, which is making its own aspects, which is how it dialogues with the other planets, which gives an astrologer an idea of how to interpret how that energy of responsibility, structure, the father, stability, social traditions, authority figures, how we deal with self-reliance, inner strength, how we deal with challenges, tests of our patience. Saturn challenges can have to do with rigidity and fear and loneliness, blockages, sometimes deeply ingrained behavior patterns. And more seriously, challenging Saturn transits or natal placements can suggest a withdrawal from life at times due to the heaviness of the challenges we face in this lifetime. So the planet Saturn, since ancient times, is considered a cold, dry planet. In ancient times, the Saturn was the farthest planet to the visible eye. So Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto had not yet been discovered or seen by the naked eye. So Saturn rules the dense material plane. And in ancient times, and still to this day in Hellenistic astrology and other ancient traditions, the planets Saturn and Mars were considered the malefics. And basically what that means is planets that can potentially bring us trouble. Not always serious, but depending on if we were born during a daytime, in a daytime chart, that means the sun is below the horizon in a birth chart. And Mars would be the greater malefic. If we're born during the evening where the sun falls below the horizon, and that would be houses 1 through 6, Saturn is the greater malefic. So that's another time for another discussion. But Saturn, it has its challenges, but it also has its rewards. So the rewards are we work hard, we take our time, we put in the effort with full concentration and perseverance, and we get rewarded for that. Saturn is about what endures through time. It's where we work harder to establish security and stability in our lives, even through times of challenges or oppressive circumstances. So, as I said earlier, we have Saturn in a particular house in our birth chart, and that is unique to each one of us. But as it transits around the birth chart, we all experience Saturn transiting around the birth chart. It spends 2.5 years in a particular zodiac sign. And the key word to remember is discipline, contraction, patience, and sustained effort, and reality tests. Those are the key words. So when Saturn transits house 1 is one of the 4 major angles of the birth chart. The first house, the 4th house, the 7th house, and the 10th house. That is where all the action really culminates, okay? So when Saturn transits the first house, it is coming out of the 12th house where things tend to dissolve. It can be a very confusing time because Saturn is all about reality and structure, and the 12th house in the birth chart is all about formlessness and transcendence and many other things like spirituality and seclusion and things of that nature. So when Saturn crosses into the first house of the body, the identity, the persona, the power public persona, how we're viewed by others around us, but primarily it is a baseline where we take more responsibility for ourselves, our physical bodies, our self-expression, the structure of our personality, our identity. The key phrase I would say for Saturn coming into house 1 is where we're molding a new sense of identity. Some examples of Saturn transiting the first house would be losing weight. Many people start a health regime and they really stick to it because they're ready to commit and they're in for the long haul. They may start an exercise program or they may work with a nutritionist. Maybe they've gained weight. They've gone through some challenging times with Saturn in the 12th house, whether it be an illness or other challenges. It is a time where people can change their health routines consistently and stick with them. It is a time where we can take on more responsibilities and we can handle those responsibilities. Our vocational interests, new vocational interests may start to emerge during Saturn's transit of the first house. On the more challenging side, sometimes we can feel more tired because Saturn rules going slower, symbolizes more slow, sustained action, and it takes time. Saturn rules time. There can be somewhat a depressive outlook for some individuals while Saturn's transiting the first house. But overall, Saturn in the first house by transit is a great opportunity to reinvent ourselves. But it requires perseverance and sustained effort. And really, this is the marker for the next 29 years evolves from this time period, going over our ascendant, ourselves, our identity, and our physical body. So house 2, when transiting Saturn moves into house 2, the second house in the birth chart has to do with psychological resources, what we value, our, not only financial resources, which is the main, you'll read the main significance of the second house, but it's also all resources that are of value to us. Whether that be resources that help us earn money, resources that contribute to our health and well-being, resources that contribute to our purpose. This is usually a time when Saturn enters the second house of increased productivity in the areas of financial resources and our personal values. So what are some examples? Well, new vocational trainings are very common during this time. Acquiring new educational resources that enhance our career or our life goals. This could be a time where we're setting the stage and creating a business plan for starting a new business. We're attending to practical fairs. We're putting a very strong emphasis on practical affairs. I can give you a couple examples. I did many trainings, not many, I would say maybe 2 to 3 trainings during Saturn's transit through my second house. And one of them was I became a soul coach. I flew out to California and when Saturn was transiting my second house, and I learned many modalities in that training. And I still use them to this day, though not exactly the way I had intended, but that became a resource that I still draw from today. Sometimes individuals with Saturn transiting the second house really they experience a contraction of their financial resources. This can be through many reasons. Maybe they've mishandled money potentially while Saturn was in the previous house, or the challenges of being laid off or terminated from a job. So sometimes individuals with Saturn transiting the second have to slash their budgets and kind of consolidate their budget and come up with a new plan to how they're going to make it through the long haul to establish themselves again in this area of life. Saturn, once it leaves the second house and goes into the third house, The third house is the area of learning, communication, early education when it's childhood early education, siblings, brothers and sisters, short-term travel, our mindset. In ancient astrology, the third house was also given the symbology for the goddess, the priestess, rituals, and divination, which I find fascinating, and I really related to it having a third house sun in my birth chart. So when Saturn enters the third house, it's often a time of increased and focused learning of new facts, skills, talents which enhance our profession or our personal life goals. It's often a time of more focused writing if one is inclined to write, whether that be journaling for a purpose, personal goal, or even writing a blog or a book or material for one's own creative pursuits. There can be increased research and focused concentration and deep thought of any kind, a serious analysis of a topic. There's usually an increased interest in reading or studying, whether that's for a certification course or just on one's own desire to learn a subject. Often there is an increased travel due to family duties, or obligations. There could be a sibling that's going through a challenging time, and we're called to step up and help that sibling. That is very common. There could be a lot of short-term travel because we're traveling back and forth to a family member's home or residence to help them out. There could be a lot of short-term travel if we're taking a course and we're flying back and forth, not internationally, but, to another state, and we're focused on gaining maybe a certification in a course that's going to enhance our learning and our focus vocationally. I definitely did another training when Saturn was transiting my third house, but on a more personal note, Saturn does rule the mindset, and Saturn can be also a heavy mindset or pessimistic or gloomy outlook, possibly grief from a loss, whether that be a child or a sibling or a family member or a friend. It can be a very heavy time mentally, and I personally experienced that in 2010. However, you have to factor in the transits Saturn was making in the natal birth chart, the solar return birthday chart, the annual perfections, and all these other tools astrologers use to determine, what exactly is really the themes of this year. And, so the theme for me with Saturn, that particular time, was Pluto was squaring Saturn, and Saturn was on my Mercury, which is my mindset. So that is a more weighty example of Saturn in the third house. So house 4, that is considered the IC, the bottom of the chart, the root of the chart. This is home, family, roots, ancestry, our parents. I personally feel this is the house of the father, and the 10th house is the house of the mother through years of experience working through charts. It also rules things like land, real estate, private matters. Inherited real estate is another example of house 4. So when Saturn transits this very important point in the birth chart, suddenly we notice an increased responsibility having to do with matters of our home, our children, our families, whether that be our immediate families if we're adults, or our parents. Our parents are aging usually at this time. They may have health issues. They may need our help. They may need caregiving. A house may be falling apart and we realize we have to renovate, or fix something that is no longer tolerable. The structure in our homes may need to be restructured, taken down and rebuilt. Or maybe we're putting an addition on a home because the family responsibilities have grown. Maybe parents have moved in. We need more room. We're renovating the house. We're taking care of our elderly parents. Maybe we're making a lot of sacrifices to help our parents or a father or a mother and their affairs. It also could represent moving because it's home, moving to a new residence altogether, because Saturn is commitment. Saturn is making a long-term enduring commitment. The fourth house is about laying foundations for any long-term ambitions. On a more challenging note, family obligations during a fourth house Saturn transit could be heavy and oppressive. As I said, that we could have aging, ill parents. There could be financial burdens of caregiving. There could be the empty nest syndrome. Children are moving out for some parents, and they're trying to figure out and commit to a new foundation in their lives, moving away from being a parent to maybe downsizing and starting something new. So it'd be interesting to hear what other people have gone through. I can share with you a few examples. So when my son passed in 2010, we soon ended up a year later, as Saturn was approaching my fourth house cusp. We bought a home in Florida to be closer to my parents and my husband's parents. And I really needed a change of scenery. My husband still had to work, so he was commuting back and forth to Florida. And I was living there full time, which ended up being a blessing because as soon as Saturn crossed my fourth house cusp, not long after, my mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and family obligations became very heavy, very weighty, and very important. I was spending hours a week driving to another location where my parents lived and helping out my mother, which was necessary, and that is where my focus was and needed to be. I have another client who, when Saturn entered her fourth house, she decided to separate. Her and her husband decided to separate. And for the first time, she had to find her own home, another place to live. She was on her own. It was somewhat of a lonely time. It was a depressing time at first. She was also let go. Her position in her job was terminated, so she had to look for another job. She went through a period of financial insecurity. Wasn't sure if she was going to be able to pay all her bills for her new condo that she leased. It ended up working out just fine. She established a new foundation, and she's very happy where she is right now. And the hard work and all that effort, it paid off. In one other example, another client decided to move because the house was just too constrictive for their growing family. And the responsibilities of having several children and having a very small home was just not sustainable for this person and their family. So they ended up relocating, and they actually bought an old home that they slowly renovated themselves. So there are a few examples for you for Saturn transiting the fourth house. As Saturn enters house 5, the fifth house in our birth charts have to do with creating something, whether it be a child, a book, a love affair. Love matters, children, our vitality, our creative pursuits are all fifth house. Fun, recreation are all fifth house affairs. So when Saturn enters the fifth house, the sustained effort and the work and focus are going into providing stability in these arenas of our life. So maybe a hobby becomes a business. Maybe we're trying to solidify our self-confidence. Maybe we've realized, things have been, we've been not paying attention to our creative pursuits, and now it's time to really put our nose to the grindstone and do that creative thing, whatever that is, whether it be artistic in any shape or form, whether that's dancing, art, music, you name it, writing. We've decided to commit to that. Many of my clients have become pregnant while Saturn was transiting their 5th house. There can be creative blocks during this time period because, as I said, Saturn can create blocks that we're challenged to work through those blocks. So it can take patience and perseverance and sustained effort, but it's well worth it in the end because we feel a sense of accomplishment once we work through that obstacle or obstacles, and we end up solidifying our self-confidence in that area of our life. Some examples of transiting Saturn through the 5th house. When transiting Saturn transited my 5th house, my mother was more settled in a nursing home, and my father and I hired a wonderful caregiver to help me out. I finally had a little more time to focus on my creative pursuits, which is astrology and tarot and intuitive coaching. I created a new website at the time. I wrote a sun sign column, which, no offense to those astrologers who write sun sign columns, I am not interested in writing a sun sign column because astrology, to me personally, is so much deeper than our sun signs. It is a very deep and soulful practice that encompasses all facets of life, archetypally, and so forth. But that is a subject for another time or a personal reading. So another example is I had a client who was making jewelry part-time on the side because it was a hobby. She turned it into a business, and she ended up making glass jewelry, and she became very successful at it. It took time, but she did it. That's another example. So, as Saturn transits the next house, which is house 6, the 6th house sometimes gets a bad rap in astrology because they call it the house of stress, the house of chronic illness, the house of work and slavery and labor. But that's not all what the 6th house is about. The 6th house is also self-adjustment, self-purification, our daily work and health routines, our relationships with our coworkers. A lot of people with planets in the 6th house, they work in the health field. They are massage therapists. They're chiropractors. They work with people that are dealing with somatic or psychosomatic illnesses. But the 6th house, more positively, is when we put a serious focus on our work and our health habits. So if a chronic health situation emerges during this time, it really makes us pay more serious attention to maybe a dietary issue or detoxification processes or analysis of our daily habitual patterns. Are we sabotaging ourselves every day? Instead of going to the gym, are we going home from work and eating ice cream before dinner and skipping the exercise routine because we're just too tired? Sometimes bad habits will rear their ugly heads during this time, and we may develop symptoms that require our focus and our discipline to improve those symptoms. I think that another real example of Saturn transiting the 6th house is our workload may increase. I have a client who, when Saturn entered her sixth house, she really had to put her nose to the grindstone, and she was given far more responsibility than she could handle, but she did it anyway. She had no choice. Another employee, a coworker, went out on maternity leave. She was given an additional load for her work routine. It was work, work, work. She ended up hurting her back and having to deal with that. Saturn rules our bones, our joints, it signifies the relationship between hard work and our health here. So, it's a wake-up call to take better care of ourselves. And if you hear my dog barking in the background, sorry about that. I have a very loud Havanese. And let's see. So ideally, we want to create and focus on daily patterns that consolidate our health, our well-being, our mental well-being, as well as our physical well-being, before Saturn's getting ready to transit into our seventh house of our one-to-one significant partnerships. That's it for today. I will provide the next recording on Saturn transiting houses 7 through 12.